Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I have a really exciting video for you all because we are going to learn how to make Procreate brushes, our own brushes to use in Procreate. So if there's a brush in mind that you haven't been able to find on either Creative Market or Etsy, or perhaps you'll be able to create your own Procreate brush and kind of learn the brush making process. So just a little disclaimer, there is no right or wrong way to make brushes in Procreate. It really is just trial and error. So I suggest that you grab your iPad and your Apple Pencil while you're watching this video, so you can really just follow along and maximize your time using this video. So to begin, I'm just going to head up here to the plus icon in the Procreate app, and I'm just going to select screen size. I'm just going to get a nice big and blank canvas to work on. I'm going to select the brushes panel, and these are the brushes we are going to be creating today. I am going to show you the process for creating virtually any brush that you want in Procreate, but I'm specifically going to go through the details of how to create 3 brushes in this video: a stamp brush, a rainbow monoline brush, and then a watercolor brush. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to scroll up just a little bit, and you'll see that there is a plus icon in the brush library. So I'm just going to scroll up here to the very top, hit this plus icon, and that's going to enable me to create a set. And so I'm just going to create a set of brushes here. I'm going to call this test 2. And then to create brushes in Procreate, you'll hit this plus icon here, and it's going to kind of auto-generate just a base for your brush. And so this is the Brush Studio. This is where you will be creating all the brushes in Procreate. As you can see here in the Brush Studio, there's this nice drawing pad here on the side where you can test out your brushes as you're making live changes over here. So if I click the drawing pad, I can clear the drawing pad. I can reset all the brush settings if I make any settings to the brush I don't like. I can do the preview size, so I can test it out really big, or I can come down here, clear the drawing pad, and test it out smaller. And then I can also choose between different colors here that they have, so I can just test out different colors on top of each other if I'm doing kind of like a painting brush or something. And so this is where we're going to be testing out the brushes that we make, and then we can test them out on our bigger canvas in the actual drawing portion of Procreate. So I'm just going to clear this out. We'll draw a line here. So the main categories that I use whenever I create brushes in Procreate is the stroke path, property, taper, shape, grain, and properties. So we'll go into each of the different categories here, but I'm going to show you the ones that I really focus on. I don't know all of the settings of the Brush Studio. I'm self-taught in Procreate, so really what I do is just to go in and play around with all these different settings. So I recommend that you do the same while watching this video. So we're first going to start with stroke path here. You're going to see spacing, streamline, jitter, and fall off under the properties under this setting. So if we increase the stroke path, you'll see that it's actually increasing the shape. If we go to the shape category, the shape here is just a circle. And so if you go to our stroke path, if we increase or decrease the stroke path, it's going to kind of place these circles on top of each other. So what happens whenever we make a stroke in Procreate, what it's doing is it's taking all of those shapes of the brush, kind of merging them all together as we make our strokes. So if we increase the spacing, we'll actually be able to see the shape of that brush. Streamline is a popular option here, and you've seen it a lot in probably a ton of different Procreate tutorials as well as TikTok tutorials. This enables you to get kind of less of a jitter with your strokes. So if I have my brush here, nice smooth stroke, if I decrease the streamline, you're kind of going to see my imperfections if my hand shakes or something. So that's what streamline is. We can mess around here. Let me decrease the spacing. Do my brush. If we do jitter, it's going to kind of deviate those shapes from the path that we write on the screen. So as you can see, let me just clear the drawing pad. It's not exactly following the stroke of my Apple Pencil. You can see there's a little jitter of the shapes surrounding that path. And if I increase this, the shape of the brush is not exactly following the path of the pencil. So this could be a really great setting if you wanted to make something like a confetti brush. So you can see that there. Fall off, let's decrease jitter. I'm going to switch to black here. Fall off is kind of where your stroke begins to fall off. A lot of the properties here make kind of sense as far as the name goes, but it begins to kind of fade out. This could be really good for watercolor brushes or painting brushes, for instance. It's almost like your pen is running out of ink. So that's kind of how I interpret the settings of this. So let's head into shape. We'll skip taper for now. I want to talk about shape a bit because shape and grain are really the basis of the brush. You're going to be spending most of your time in the shape and grain category of the brush studio. So this is the shape source. This is what the shape looks like of our brush. So let me go back here and decrease the spacing and increase the streamline. All right, heading back to shape. I'm going to clear my drawing pad. So the shape of our brush is a circle. Of course, with our brushes, we can actually change that shape. We could have a square or a triangle or whatever shape that we wanted. And I'm going to click this edit button up here, and I'm going to click import. Here you can import a photo, so if you already have kind of a shape for a brush that you already want to use, as well as import a file. Maybe you have something already copied to your clipboard and you want to paste. But let's hit source library. What's great about Procreate is Procreate already has a library full of shapes and sources that you can use to make brushes, and they honestly have kind of an overwhelming amount of shape sources and grain sources that you can start with making Procreate brushes. Obviously not all Procreate brushes that we can buy from our favorite designers use the shape source and grain sources of Procreate. You can get kind of creative with making your own shapes and grain sources, but I think Procreate has a really great starter as far as choosing shapes and choosing grains. And so let's say we want to go with this kind of brick shape here. So as you can see, it changed our shape. You want to make sure that you hit done up here. I've made that mistake so many times before. I don't click done and it doesn't change your shape. So I'm going to click done. And so now if I clear my drawing pad, we can see that there's a change to our strokes. So now the shape is this kind of rectangular end here. If we increase the spacing, you'll see that it is that brick shape that we chose for our shape. I'm going to turn the spacing back down. So now let's head over into grain. Now grain is kind of the texture of the brush, I guess you could say. We'll click this edit button the same. Right now there is no grain, so that's why it's kind of white. If we hit import and go to our source library, we can choose from the grain source for Procreate. So as you can see, they have a lot of different textures here that we can choose from. They have canvas and charcoal. They have interesting ones like wood and bark. One thing I wanted to bring up is that they have a grid. So here's a grid. They got paper. 70s. That would have been good for my 70s set had I realized that was in there. They have just a lot of different grain sources that we can make use of. So let's say I want to go with bacteria. Let's see what that looks like. Hit done. So now we have kind of this bacteria speckled blunt brush here that we created in Procreate. So this would be good if we needed to make a little bacteria pattern, I guess. So you can really just explore around and play with the possibilities of just the shape and just the grain. So you already have so many different options when it comes to choosing between those two. Let's say we chose this as our grain source. We can actually scale up or scale down this grain source. So we can make it super big, make it really small. So we can adjust the scale of the grain itself as well as the movement. So you can see as you play around with different settings in the brush library, you'll get different effects and you'll be able to see these live effects over here in the drawing pad. So as you can see, we get a very different effect for this brush just by changing a few settings within the grain source. And we haven't even really touched the other settings just yet. Of course, there's other settings here. I don't normally mess with these settings, but again, you can just write something here, kind of see what happens when you change different aspects of your drawing over here on the drawing pad. So I'm going to head over and choose a different source for my grain. Maybe I want to go with blank for this one again. Hit done. And let's go back and change the shape. A circle brush, just so you can mess around with the other settings. Heading into taper, this is where you can adjust the taper of your brush. So you can come around here and mess with these. So this is really handy for calligraphy brushes. So this is the pressure of your taper. You can kind of mess around here with the tip sizes, the opacity. So again, these would be really great if you wanted to make kind of calligraphy brushes. Alright, so here's a few aspects for rendering. Again, you can mess around with these settings and see what they do. So here we have kind of a light glaze. This is really great if you want to make kind of like buildable brushes, so brushes that you can kind of build on top of each other and get kind of this interesting effect. This is really great for watercolor and for painting brushes. Similarly, there are wet edges and burnt edges, so watercolor typically has kind of darker edges because of the paint run, so you can kind of increase the wet or burntness of those edges as well. We'll get a little bit more into those settings when we go to make the watercolor brush. We have wet mix. So again, this is more so for traditional painting brushes if you kind of want to mimic the look of painting brushes. Again, you can mess around with these settings to see what they do. Kind of see the effect of these brushes as well. We have color dynamics, which is really interesting to play around with, especially if you have the updated version of the Procreate app. You can actually mess around with the pressure and tilt of the pencil to get a different effect for color. So again, this might be really handy for those who want to use watercolor or different calligraphy brushes. We can just mess around here with the settings and kind of see what they do as far as the color goes. So that's fun. Then we have dynamics here. So this is really just mostly the speed of the brush. So if you want to slow down the brush, or if you really want to speed it up, make it really fast, and as soon as you write on the canvas, the brush is there, or if you want to decrease the size, you know, it kind of takes some time before it follows your pencil. So we can do that. Obviously, we can adjust the opacity here, as well as jitter again. We can incorporate that jitter effect. Clear the drawing pad. Here's more things that you can mess around with the Apple Pencil as far as the tilt of the pencil, the different opacities, the flows, bleeding, smooth. There's all kinds of things here that you can really mess around with, and this will really, again, come in handy if you're making calligraphy brushes. Depending on how you tilt your pencil, this is what the brush will do, kind of thing. Again, I don't really make calligraphy brushes. I'm not super into iPad calligraphy just because I'm still learning that myself. So I don't really mess around with these settings as much, but this is something that you can kind of mess around a bit to see the effect. Then we get into the properties. This is another aspect of the Brush Studio that I use quite often, and so this is where you can adjust the size and the opacity of the brush, as well as kind of the preview of the brush. So if you wanted to do stamp, you could select this and have it be the stamp preview. You can change the preview size of the brush, so if you wanted it to show up pretty big in the brush library, or if you wanted it to be a little bit thinner in the brush library. You can also change the maximum size of the brush, so maybe you don't want to be able to access this big of a size when you're working on the canvas, so maybe you want to make it a little smaller, maybe you want to increase the minimum size of the brush. Of course, you can change the minimum and maximum opacity as far as using that brush on the canvas. And then the last category of the Brush Studio is the About This Brush, and that's where you can title the brush, add in your logo or your picture, your name, and you can sign and make it yours. So we're going to go ahead and jump into creating 3 different Procreate brushes. Again, you can use these settings to create any brush that you want, but I want to show you how to create specifically 3 different brushes. And first we're going to start with the stamp brush. So I'm going to hit cancel, and I'm just going to go into the calligraphy section on Procreate and choose the monoline. And then I'm just going to select black here. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to back out of this and go into a square canvas. Do a black background, new layer. I'm going to select white and make sure I'm on my monoline. Let's see what the size is. I'm going to go a little bit bigger. Okay. Pretty good. Alright, so I'm sitting at about 80, 81, 82. And I'm just going to make a heart stamp. You can make whatever stamp you want. You'll just draw whatever icon that you want to use, and we'll just go with it. So I'm going to use a heart. We'll just draw a nice heart here. Copy that over. I'm just going to merge those 2 down, hit copy. I'm going to go into my brush library, head back up to the top where my test 2 library is, and hit the plus icon. I'm going to go to shape, hit edit shape, import, and hit paste. We're going to see what that looks like. So now it kind of looks funny, kind of pointed in because we're using the shape source as a heart. I'm going to go to stroke path, then increase spacing to max. So you might have to kind of pull it all the way until it stays. So there we have that. I'm going to increase the streamline. As you can see, there is pressure sensitivity with this brush. So right now, the harder I press, the darker the stamp will be. The lighter I press, the lighter the stamp will be. This is not something that we want. We can head over into Apple Pencil. As you can see, the opacity is at max. I'm going to turn all the way off. I'm going to select none. Pull it all the way to none. And now we have our stamp. So no matter how hard or how softly I press on the screen, I'll get a consistent color for my heart stamp. And that's really all there is to it. We can go to our properties. We can select use stamp preview so it shows the heart stamp. And maybe I'll increase the maximum size a bit. Let's go with that. Maybe I'll increase the minimum size. Maybe I'll increase the preview size a bit. I can go in here and title my brush. So we'll call this heart stamp. Hit done. And there is our heart stamp. So this is what the preview image looks like. If I wanted to change that, make it a little smaller, I can just go into preview, make that a bit smaller. There we go. So now I'm going to clear this layer and choose whatever color I want. Now I have a heart stamp. So there is our first brush. Let's go in and make our second brush. I'm going to hit the plus icon for a new brush. Now we're going to make a rainbow brush. I'm going to head over into my Apple Pencil and then I'm going to turn down the opacity to none because I kind of want, just a solid monoline type brush. So no matter how hard or how softly I press on the screen, it won't affect kind of the opacity of the brush itself. I'm going to leave the shape and grain the same. Remember on the last brush, we only changed the shape source and I left the grain the same. For this one, I'm going to leave the shape and the grain the same. And then I'm going to head over into color dynamics for our rainbow brush. And then we're going to mess around with the color dynamics of our brush to get a really cool rainbow effect when we draw. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to increase the hue and saturation of both the stroke color and the pressure. So you can increase the hue and saturation to whatever you like. I'm just going to go with around 60-ish here maybe, and then for this saturation I'll maybe go around 20-ish. And then for the pressure, I'm going to kind of mimic that. I'm going to go around 60-ish. And then for saturation, I'm also going to go around 20-ish. So as you can see on the drawing pad, we can't really get this effect going. I'm going to select done. And I'm going to clear this layer and have my color. So now when I draw on the canvas, it's kind of fun rainbow colors. So what I'm going to do actually is go into properties, maybe make my maximum size a little smaller, make my preview size a little smaller, select done. And now we have our fun rainbow brush. So it's going to be different kind of with whatever color you choose, how you draw on the canvas, the stroke of your Apple Pencil. It's all kind of just a little bit random, so it's really fun to kind of play around with these rainbow brushes. So this would be really great for calligraphy or something. I'm actually going to go back into my brush, go to the stroke path and increase the streamline to max. I'm going to increase the brush size here. We get this really fun effect. So now we have a fun rainbow brush. This can be just fun to kind of play around with, do something fun with lettering. So now we have a cool rainbow brush to add to our own brush library that we made ourselves. So now we are going to make a watercolor brush. The watercolor brush is a little bit more involved. So I'm going to head over here to my brush library, hit plus, because we're going to make a new brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the shape source first. I recommend going to the shape and grain source within the Brush Studio before making any other changes because these two are really the basis of your brush. So I'm going to select edit, I'm going to go to import and then source library. For the watercolor brush, I'm going to select the ink mess as the shape source. So I'll select done. Don't forget to hit done. I'm going to increase kind of the scatter of the brush. So we're going to move that to about 130-ish. I'll increase the rotation a bit. So let's do it pretty high. So as you can see, we're already starting to get kind of that painted look. If you like it how it is, you can just go with that. Alright, I'm going to increase this a bit. Kind of just play around with some settings here. Alright, let's head into grain. Let's make this look a bit more watercolory. We're going to hit edit, import, and go into the source library. And let's see. I'm going to search for clouds, and I'm going to select clouds 2, hit done. So now we got a little bit more of a watercolor effect there. I'm going to increase the scale here a bit. Then I'm going to head over into rendering, and I'm going to select light glaze. So as I talked about earlier, this is really handy for kind of brushes that you want to be able to kind of build on. So we can build on top of these brushes really well, which is something that we can do with traditional watercolor. So as you can see, we're already getting that really nice watercolor effect from this brush. I'm going to increase the flow. We already have that. I'm going to increase these wet edges. I really like the way watercolor looks because of these wet edges. And then I'm going to increase the burntness of the edges. We'll leave all of that the same. Head into color dynamics. I'm going to increase the darkness just a bit so we can kind of have a little bit more definition with this brush. So as you can see, it kind of increased these areas of the brush, kind of like traditional watercolor almost. You know, the harder I press, the more I'm getting out of the paintbrush. If I paint very lightly, I'm getting very light strokes here for the watercolor brush. Alright, let's increase the saturation a bit from the pressure of the brush as well. So the harder I press, the more of this kind of watercolor I get. But I can also kind of buff it out here, spread the paint around almost. Alright, clearing my brush. I'll do a stroke so I can make some changes. Let's head into Apple Pencil. I'm going to turn the opacity all the way down. So if you wanted that effect, or if you wanted to increase the opacity a bit, kind of have it fall off, maybe I'll increase it just a bit like that. Now let's decrease it. Very indecisive with brushes. Alright, and then I'm going to increase the flow, maybe go around 70-ish. Yeah, let's decrease the opacity a bit more. There we go. I'm gonna mess around with the tilt of the Apple Pencil, perhaps. So you can see how the brush changes a bit depending on the tilt of your brush. So I believe when you create brushes, it's normally sitting around 30-ish. So we'll go with that. Alright, heading into the properties of the pencil itself, I'm going to decrease the maximum size a bit. Maybe decrease the preview size. I think I'm going to go back to the opacity and turn it off since I increased the flow. Let me decrease the flow a bit. Yes. So it's just kind of coming in here and doing trial error with some of the settings. This is what I like to do. See what a different color looks like. Yes, it's very watercolory. And it's buildable, which is what I wanted for my brush. Alright, so now I'm going to select done. So now we have our watercolor brush. Let's test it out with a fun color here. I'm going to increase my pen a bit. So now we have a really nice kind of watercolor illustration type brush. So this brush would be really handy if you just kind of wanted to illustrate a bit with watercolor and have a bit more of a fine edge. Come in here and choose a different color, see what they look like next to each other. And so there you have a watercolor brush. If you think this is a little too splotchy, you can come in here, go to grain, hit edit, and you can change it to another source. So maybe we can go with clouds 1 and see what that looks like. So this is a little less splotchy, but still very much kind of watercolor-ish. And so that is how you create watercolor, stamp, and rainbow brushes in Procreate. So if you have a good set of brushes that you have created in Procreate, it's so easy to just go into those set of brushes and then create more from that set. So you want to make sure that you're creating more Procreate brushes from a set that you have already created yourself. So if I wanted to create more stamp brushes, I could easily just go in, duplicate a stamp brush, add a new shape source for the stamp instead of just kind of repeating that whole process of creating a new stamp brush. So for instance, if I wanted to create a new stamp, I can just go in and duplicate it and then just edit that shape source again. So you can go in and make kind of minor little tweaks to the brushes that you create. So I'll go in here, for instance, and go to my shape source and just kind of paste in like maybe a hand-drawn sunshine that I created, and now you have kind of a whole new stamp, just super fast. So if you wanted kind of a hand-drawn sunshine or just whatever you want to create as far as a stamp or making more tweaks to your brushes, it's super easy to do so with Procreate. And just as a reward for making it through the entirety of this video, be sure to check the description box down below to access the brushes that we made in this video for free. You'll be able to access them using the password on my website. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in my next video next week. Until next time, bye!